from ocean floors. So both of these guys are extremely rare. Jack Horner took a inventory once of how many dinosaurs were found in the bottom of the ocean. There are only about a dozen last time I looked, probably more now. But so then these bones right here were brought to my attention by a student of mine, and they are toe bones. Here's a drawing of the bones in the foot. These are the foot bones up here and the toe bones, and these are 3 bones right there. So I had no idea what they were. So I went up to the Museum of the North, where they have thousands of these things, and to my amazement, these are 2 bones here from a juvenile hadrosaur that came from the North Slope, and these are the 2 that came from the Talkeetna Mountains. And you can see they're very similar, but they're not exactly the same. This one is a little longer. The proportions are a little different. So that was a pretty amazing thing, that we found another hadrosaur in the Talkeetna Mountains. The skeleton, okay, here's a skeleton of a hadrosaur, and the ones in black are the bones. So you can see we have some tail fragments, some forelimbs, parts of the hind limbs, no head, and I'll talk about the hip in just a minute. But if you go to the museum, I think Madeline handed out some brochures a little while ago, and they're more up here on the table. The little museum in Mountain View has this skeleton on display. This is a cast of a hadrosaur from Montana. And when we found this thing, we thought, well, it's pretty much like the hadrosaurs in the rest of the lower 48, so that's cool. So we bought this little juvenile cast from Montana. It's a Maiasaura, to kind of show people what a juvenile hadrosaur looks like, what a duckbill looks like. And here's the skull there. So the other part, this thing right here, which has been plastered up, it's about 3 feet across, and it's really heavy. And we couldn't excavate it out of the rock, so we just put plaster around it, put it in a truck, and that was over 10 years ago, 15 years ago. It sat up in Fairbanks all that time, and Pat Druckenmiller now has decided he's going to try to prepare it, get rid of the matrix, get rid of the rock, and try to get the hip bones out of it, and that will help tell us maybe what kind of a hadrosaur it is. So the other amazing thing about this, and by the way, I skipped the picture. Do you see, remember the picture of the little girl? Because we didn't have any skull, we didn't have any hip, we couldn't name this thing. It's just a hadrosaur. And so just for some kind of name, I decided it would be a good idea to call it something. And I asked that little girl, her name was Lizzie, her nickname was Lizzie. I said, can we name it after you? She was 14 years old at the time. She was the daughter of my student, and I've never seen anybody like her. She would sleep out on the ground at night in a sleeping bag, and she would work all day long. She screened sediment, she carried water, she carried rocks. She was just unbelievable. She found a contact lens when I lost it. And so I said, can we name this dinosaur after you, just so we can give it a name? So it's been known as Lizzie all this time, but it needs a scientific name. So if Patrick ever gets the hip out of the rock, he may be able to give it a scientific name as well. Well, the other amazing thing is you always hear about it's important to excavate very carefully. And in the 1800s, when dinosaur bones were found in the western states, they were just digging out bones and shipping them east and just helter-skelter. It was kind of a free-for-all. And now we know it's very important to excavate carefully and slowly. And in that process, we picked up this funny little thing right here that's about 6 inches long, and it's coiled, and it's an ammonite. And I took it to a friend of mine here in Anchorage who has an ammonite collection. In fact, we have it on display in our exhibit hall. And he couldn't tell me what it was. I said, I asked him to identify it, and he was totally baffled. So I thought, oh shoot. So then I took it to California, and I was embarrassed to ask somebody to look at this thing in the middle of their busy day. So I asked a guy who was retired if he would look at it. And he took one look at it, and he said, you have to talk to Will Elder. And he turned out to be an expert. And he looked at this ammonite, and that was his specialty, and he couldn't name it either. And he was sitting there chewing on his pencil. He said, I've seen something like this somewhere, but I'm not sure where that is. And oh my gosh. So finally he ran out of the door, ran down to his office, and he came back with another book printed in Japanese. And it turned out, this darn thing, it has a counterpart in Japan. It's never been found in North America before, but only in Japan, which means that in the Cretaceous, there was a connection of life between sea animals, between Alaska and Japan. It has a wonderful name, Eubos trichoceros, a snaky-like thing. Well, a wonderful thing about ammonites is you can date them. They have very short lifespans as a group. And he told me this thing was Turonian, which you don't care about, but that's a little division in the Cretaceous. And then he said, I have to go somewhere, I have a meeting. He ran off, and I had to look up the age of Turonian. And there was a huge shock. All of the hadrosaurs on the North Slope are this age up here, Maastrichtian and Campanian, late Cretaceous. Turonian is a very short period, about 90 million years old. We know the date because of this guy, so that puts Lizzie way outside the range of all the other hadrosaurs in this state. And in fact, it's way outside the range of all hadrosaurs found anywhere in the world. So, dumb me, I was going around the country, I thought I would find a match to Lizzie before I realized Lizzie is much older than all those other guys. And at that time, there were less than 10 hadrosaurs that had ever been, hadrosaur-like things that had ever been found that were 90 million years old. And half of them are probably not hadrosaurs at all. So Lizzie is one of the oldest hadrosaurs ever found. And if Pat can figure out how to, has enough characters to define a name, it will have to be a new name because she cannot be the same as everything else from the North Slope or from Montana. There are one or two others that have been found now, but anyway, that was the amazing thing about Lizzie. These guys down here are probably the ancestors of hadrosaurs. These are iguanodons, and that's the one that has the nose, the thumb was put on its nose. Remember that? You read the kids' books about dinosaurs. They put the thumb spike on its nose. Well, that's an iguanodon. And they were first found in Europe. Okay, so running off to the North Slope. Again, the North Slope, here's the, oops, we're hitting the wrong thing. Here's the western seaway here, and the North Slope is way up there. Here is the Beaufort Sea, Dead Horse is there, the Colville River is right here. The very famous place called Ocean Point is right there. The Liscombe Bone Bed is where these thousands and thousands of bones came from. This is what the cliff looks like. The bone bed is about 3 feet. Right in here is a bone bed, and bones are washing down into the base of the slope, and that's where Alaskan found the first one in '61. And so the geology, looking at the rocks, it tells us that even in the Cretaceous, the North Slope was kind of a broad alluvial plain. It had very low relief. It had a lot of meandering streams, a lot of islands, and it also had a lot of vegetation because there are fossil tree trunks about 8 inches in diameter on the slope. So we know there was a lot of vegetation to support these guys. So it was called, for years, it was called an Edmontosaurus because it kind of looked like the hadrosaurs in the rest of the United States. They found both. We know there were family groups, we know there were adults and juveniles, because here's a comparison of the centra. Here's a vertebra. Here's the centra, which is the big heavy part, that's the backbone. Here's an adult size, there's a juvenile size. So we know that they weren't all adults or not children. And finally, Roman Gameloff was able to assemble a skull. He had hundreds and hundreds of skull pieces, and it's like a gigantic jigsaw puzzle. He finally was able to put together the bone fragments of probably 10 or 12 different animals, just trying to get some idea of what the skull really looked like. And here's a drawing of a beak with these teeth. The most amazing thing about a hadrosaur is its tooth battery. Right in here, there are about 500 teeth all packed in. The teeth are only about 1/4 of an inch wide, and there are a whole bunch of them packed in there. And the grinding surface is made up of all these teeth packed together. So here's a tooth that has not been worn. Here's a tooth that's been worn down. And of course, they all fall out. So you never find a jaw like that, but you find hundreds of teeth. And so now, Pat Druckenmiller has looked at the skull. He had actually a graduate student look at the skull, and that's why you can't quite see the name up at the top. So you can see it in the next one. The root of it is grinding teeth. Aluk is old. Cook is the Eskimo name for the Colville River. And notice that this is James Haven's painting. It's a little different than the first one I showed you, but this is a reconstruction of the Alaskan genus. So this gives you an idea of how big it was. This would be an adult. It would be a pretty formidable guy if you were to meet him in a dark alley. And it is now given its own name because of a suite of characters that distinguish it from other hadrosaurs. So it took a lot of work to look at the skull and take measurements and so on. So then the next big discovery was the ceratopsids. They're quite rare, and it turned out that we also have a new species. There were, when I was in Canada quite a long time ago, these pachyrhinosaurs, which they're like Triceratops, which you're familiar with, except that they have these funny bumps on their noses. And at that time, about 20 years ago, they were considered to be very rare. And now in Canada, they've got about 10,000 of them. And it turns out that the skull fragments that were found on the Colville River in the North Slope are different enough so they have their own name. And the species name, this Parotorum, this is named after Ross Perot because this is, he gave a lot of money to the Dallas Museum. Tony Fiorello, who excavated this material, is associated with the Dallas Museum, so he honored Perot for all his big donations by giving him made. So here's a wonderful reconstruction by James Haven of these Alaskan Dinosaurs. We don't know why they have these funny bumps on their noses, whether they used it for fights or not, but it's definitely a very impressive piece. So then this is a new discovery based on a single skull fragment. You may have heard about the dome heads. They're only about this high. They're not quite as high as I am. And there's been a lot of speculation about them. This is a drawing showing you they have these funny skulls. They have very massive bone in their skulls and little bumps and spikes all over. So they're very strange and nobody quite understands their behavior. Here's Ray Troll's drawing of an Alaskan one. And all that is based on, this is a skull fragment that was on exhibit in the Museum of the North. So this is a skull fragment in the back of the skull, and the whole restoration is based on this and looking at other animals that are more complete. It's fairly rare because it's small and the bones are fragile. It's not easy to find one. Hypsilophodons are also found. We have teeth and bone, not a whole lot of material. They're very small. Ornithopods, they're plant eaters with various kinds of teeth. And then we have some theropods. I took that for white teeth, but I don't think he ever used it. So how do we know they existed up there? If there were all these thousands and thousands of nice juicy hadrosaurs, there must have been something else there that wanted to eat them. And the evidence comes mostly from serrated teeth, and I've got a couple of teeth up here you can look at if you like, but they're not very big. There are a few scraps and bones from the skeletons, but most of the material comes from the teeth because these teeth are shed. So when a big carnivore starts attacking a hadrosaur, it loses teeth. So you find these teeth, they're not associated with skulls or their own skeletons, but that's basically the evidence for most of it. And right here is I don't know if you can see the groove on this bone, but there are scratches and grooves on hadrosaur bones that are supposedly made by those teeth, that the teeth fit the grooves. Ornithomimids are very rare. The skeletal material is pretty scrappy because they're very light bird-like animals. Their bones are fragile. They don't preserve very well. Could have been eating insects or plants, little things like that. They were probably feathered. And then one of the most important ones is Troodon. And it's known for its big eyes. This restoration right here is in the little museum in Mountain View. It's known mainly from teeth, and it's not quite as tall as a person. Here's a restoration showing it with more feathers. We don't have any feathers, fossil feathers in Alaska. So this is all speculation, but because they found these feathered dinosaurs in China, everybody's jumping on the feathered bandwagon. In the 70s, there was a guy named Gregory Paul, who wrote a book and illustrated all the dinosaurs, and he feathered all of them. And he was basically the laughing stock. Nobody believed him. They thought it was a big joke. And he got the last laugh, because now we're beginning to find these feathers, and they weren't flying. But why do they have feathers? If you look at a chicken, and a goose, they have these little tiny fluffy feathers, right? And what do? Keep them warm. So dinosaurs probably had these little stubby feathers, probably kept them warm. This one has the biggest brain relative to its body size. So this is the Einstein of the dinosaur group on the North Slope. And then we have a few Dromaeosaurus. Again, it's based on very scrappy material. These are the guys with these fabulous sickle claws on their feet, so they lifted up their feet to disembowel their prey. They were small, but they might have hunted in packs to bring, if they're gonna bring down a 40-ton hadrosaur, they probably couldn't do it alone, so they'd have to have help from all their buddies. And so that's a restoration with a lot of feathers. We don't have enough material to show you an Alaskan skull, so this is a fake news right here. This is So do we have the big ones? Well, the biggest one is Nankosaurus, the polar bear lizard, known from 3 fragments of a skull and the lower jaw. Strong teeth, a very strong jaw because it has a sagittal crest on the top of its skull, so it had powerful jaws for bringing down prey, very good vision, had a large olfactory cavity in the brain, so it had good smell to smell something, it might have been carrion or else something else, capable probably of catching its prey live. It's not as big as T-Rex by any means, but it would be a formidable opponent. If you would run into one, you'd be in trouble. So, why are dinosaurs important? They are by far and away the largest collection of what we call high latitude. We got all these dinosaurs in the lower 48, in England, in Morocco, all kinds of places. But the ones at high latitudes were not known until very recently, and for the most part, they're very, very rare. But we have thousands of them. They are, in Alaska, they are very diverse. I'll show you a list in a minute. They extend the geographic ranges of dinosaurs. We always thought they didn't live here. And they support the idea that there was an exchange of species between Asia and Alaska. This is just a few of the bones. I took this picture of this cabinet, but up in Fairbanks, there are just thousands and thousands and thousands of bone fragments. Here's a map that's very outdated now that was developed by Rich, but it shows you the other high latitude localities and the size of the circle. The size of the circle here was supposed to represent the number compared to other localities, and that's way, way outdated. But the other localities are northern Canada, Yukon Territory, Siberia, and then there are also localities in Australia and the Antarctic. But all these other localities have fragments and small populations. They're not nearly the overwhelming amount of material that you find in Alaska. The diversity, we have both of the clades I mentioned before, ornithischians, we have the bird hip. These are the plant eaters, hadrosaurs, the triceratops type thing, the funny nose guys that are related to triceratops, the hipposalopodontids, and the honored ones, the ankylosaurus. And then in the theropods, the saurischians, we have the ornithomiimids, the troodontids, the dromaeosaurids, the tyrannosaurids, and the sauropods. So I just point out this word, tyrannosaurid. Notice it ends in ID. Okay, a Tyrannosaurus rex is a given species. A tyrannosaurid is a guy that belongs to that family. Okay, so it's a group. So we have a tyrannosaurid, we don't have a tyrannosaurus, just to make that little distinction. So we're getting a lot of information about physiology. How do these guys live? The first pictures of dinosaurs show them to be very slow, like lizards. They couldn't move until the sun warmed them up. And now we're learning that's totally impossible. Remember, dinosaurs are on their toes, right? They run. You can't run if you're sluggish and stupid. You can't run into things. You gotta have the coordination, right? If you're running, you don't wanna run into things. If you're running after something, you gotta have the vision and the physical coordination to catch them. So we're learning a lot. If these guys lived up here, the climate was warmer than it is now. But they still had to cope with occasional below freezing temperatures. It wasn't 50 below. Maybe it was 30 below, or 30 degrees. Really confused now. 30 degrees Fahrenheit would be 2 degrees below freezing. So the temperature would go below freezing, but not very often. So it was more like maybe Oregon or Washington or something like that. It wasn't what you see today. The climate was different, but it was still way colder than it was in Colorado. So we have to look at the question of metabolism. Are dinosaurs hot-blooded or cold-blooded? You're hot-blooded, lizards are cold-blooded. I think they've been looking at bones of dinosaurs, and they don't really match what you see in a mammal, and they don't really match what you see in a lizard. So they probably had their own kind of metabolism, something that we don't understand or we've never seen before. But they certainly had some kind of mechanism to cope. They probably had feathers to keep them warm. We know that because there were juveniles and adults, that they probably took care of their young. We don't know exactly about their family groups, but from the trackways we can find out if they traveled in herds, for example. Did they go alone? Did they care for their young? You've got baby tracks in the middle of a trackway. It looks like they're taking care of their young. Did they migrate? When these things were first found, everybody said, oh, they couldn't stay in Alaska. They migrated to Montana. No way. You look at the migrations of caribou. Did caribou migrate to Montana? No. So migration is kind of fallen by the wayside as the answer to how these guys could live there. But they're a little bit smaller. They have downy feathers. They have very large eyes. And legs are in the bones. Those are lines of growth like you have in tree rings. And that means that they grew with seasons. And that means they lived there year-round. So you want me to shut up, right? Okay. I can just about finish. Okay, so where can you see dinosaurs? Today, you can go to the little museum in Mountain View, and that's what the brochure is. And we're always looking for volunteers, so if you like museums, let me know. We need somebody to stand at the door and take the money. And we're also looking for a science educator. If you know any science educators that are retired and want a little real easy job, let me know about that too. I'm sorry, this is outdated. This exhibit has come down, much to my horror. This was an exhibit up in Fairbanks, so you can't see that anymore. But you can see the Ray Troll exhibit at the Art Museum downtown. So I will open it up to questions. And if I don't get them all answered, maybe you can stop me so you can tell me yourself.
Anybody would like to ask a few questions? mic so everyone can hear.
Some of the very first posts or pictures you posted was somebody going up to the Alaska Peninsula and finding the footprints. Can you explain exactly where that was, or the general area of the Alaska Peninsula?
Yeah, the general area. If you look up Black Lake in your atlas, it was near there. It's on the Alaska. Yeah, it's right off the coast. A hard place to get to, expensive place to get to. And that's the problem with Alaska dinosaurs. In Colorado, you could do field work 12 months out of the year. You want to, and you can get in your car and you can go to the dinosaur site. To get to the North Slope, you have to go in. You've got a little window of weather time, and even that summertime, you can have a snowstorm anytime, so your logistics are horrific. How much does it cost? You can't drive there. You have to charter a plane. So everything in Alaska is much more difficult than in the other places. So that's one of our challenges.
Question? So you were saying about how up here in Alaska we have such a diversity of the Arctic dinosaurs that have been found. Is that because we actually had more diversity up here, or just they've been found compared to other Arctic areas?
We don't have more diversity than they do in the lower 48, but we have way more diversity than any other high latitude location.
Is that because there's actually more diversity, or just because we actually found?
We don't know. It could be, that's a wonderful question. Is it lack of data, or is it a true reflection of the diversity in other places? We don't know.
Any other questions? Yes, sir?
So, you mentioned before about crocodilians, and I was wondering what exactly a crocodilian was, and alligators are part of crocodilians?
Yes. Yeah, crocodilian is an alligator, caiman, crocodile, and there are crocodiles are fabulous animals because they go way back to the Permian. They evolved before dinosaurs did. So they look kind of slow and stupid, but they've lived a lot longer than you have as a Homo sapiens. They know how to survive. They're fabulous.
So what is the borderline between a crocodile and, is there any other animals close to a crocodilian? There's a lot of crocodile, alligator type creatures. Do we have does that make sense?
Well, it depends on how big the group is, but generally a crocodilian is very much like a crocodile or an alligator or a caiman.
So, the dew claws on dogs and cats, did those come from dinosaurs as well?
Well, yeah.
No. But that's called parallel evolution. So you look at a dew claw and you wonder why that's there. So you can answer the question, how many toes did the dog's ancestor have? 5. Good question. Just it's a different branch in the tree of life. It's just a branch. The mammals have branched on.
She was referencing the one slide you had with the 3-toe versus the 4-toe.
Yeah.
The 4-toe being unnecessary,
Right.
which is similar to the blue claws.
Exactly right. It's parallel evolution. If you don't use it, you lose it.
Can you calculate how long the lifespan of a single dinosaur was, and how long did they live for?
That's a wonderful question. And I'm not the expert on that at all. But there are people looking at that question. One of them is Jack Horner. And what he has done, he has put kind of a growth series together. So you take a whole lot of bones, the little ones, the middle-sized ones, the big ones, and the old ones. And you kind of extrapolate. You can't tell exactly. He was born on the you know, this year and he died on that year. You can't do that. But we think that they lived probably 30 to 40 to 50 years. They have a lifespan, and people are trying to figure that out, because that's a very interesting question.
I'm sorry, one more question. You said that there's only one person in the university system right now. So do you mean Alaska that is doing paleontology?
That's correct.
Just one?
Yeah, I've been retired for 20 years. Nobody replaced me.
Oops, sorry.
Yeah, so this is sort of similar to talking about the diversity geographically. Why are there so few fossils from the Jurassic and older? Because you just don't think the dinosaurs lived through then, or something happened to the part of the Jason part of life?
Good question. Part of the reason is that we don't have any non-marine Jurassic rocks. We have the biggest, thickest section of Jurassic rocks in the world on the Alaska Peninsula. But the problem is they're all marine. And Alaska's very young geographically. Alaska has not existed through geologic time the way Middle North America has. We were mostly ocean all through time until the Jurassic and the Cretaceous, but we just don't have the right kind of rocks. If you're looking for dinosaurs, you dig out a geologic map and you look for Jurassic, Triassic, or Cretaceous rocks, but they should be non-marine. And then that's why the Talkeetnas are so crazy, because nobody in their right mind would go there looking for dinosaurs. And yet we stumbled into two of them. That's crazy. But on the North Slope, those are non-marine rocks, and they're pretty extensive. Whereas in the Antarctic, the rock exposures are smaller because you have so much ice. There's not a whole lot of land that is accessible.
I wonder if there's any speculation that those carnivorous dinosaurs would regrow their teeth after they choose them.
Yes, they do. Yeah, they keep regrowing them all the time. Right. So one guy's gonna leave a lot of teeth, and that's nice for us because otherwise we probably wouldn't find them. Why do they have so many holes in their head? Mostly because of the muscle configuration. You have, remember that bear skull or whatever mammal skull I had up there? The muscle, their jaw comes up under that bar and attaches right here. And we need our skull is without holes because we have to protect our big brain. So if we had holes up there, our brain would be susceptible to damage. So mammals are protecting their brain, so they decided not to have such powerful jaws in trade for the big brain.
Okay, I think Anne will be here for a few more minutes. Is that correct? Yeah, she'll be here if you want to come in for a little one-on-one. So we'd like to give our tokens of appreciation at this time. So here's our Anchorage Science Club certificate to Anne Pach. October 8, 2007, what's so great about dinosaurs? Cheers to you. Not only do you know your stuff, research, teaching, etc., but you also know how to explain and illustrate it to folks with no science background, self-identified science geeks, and everyone in between, but especially those with curiosity and a sense of humor. We hope you enjoyed the gift certificate from 49 State Brewing, as well as the priceless adulation of your audience. And here's the gift certificate for $25 from 49 State Brewing. Woo!